Good evening. Thank you for joining us and welcome to this episode of IFS Zoom On, a webinar series developed to explore IFS educational staff expertise and classroom practices. Tonight's webinar will be hosted by Cynthia Clarke, Doli Lizaso, S.J. Lee, and Tammy, four experienced IFS teachers who implements the Radio Amelia approach with our kindergarten students. At the end of their presentation, you will have the opportunity to ask them questions, either by writing them in the chat or by clicking on raise hand, and we'll activate your microphone. Before we start, I will hand over to Jerome Bel, our kindergarten director.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jerome Bel, the director of the kindergarten at IFS. I'm pleased to open this Zoom on Radio Amelia pedagogical approach and just want to give you some details about our school. Just to give you a general overview, to let you understand a bit more about what will be said later. So currently we are welcoming 400 students into 18 classes. And our school is part of a large network of French schools abroad called AEFE, l'Agence pour l'enseignement français à l'étranger. It's a large network. There are 535 French schools located in 139 countries. Our school is certified by the French Ministry of Education, and all our classes are following the French curriculum. So I will just give you a short description of the French curriculum we have implemented in the kindergarten, and you will discover after that the pedagogical approach Radio Amelia is totally in line with what the French curriculum asks. So we can just move and discover the next slide. I just focus on the previous one, please. Just focus on two extracts. That is very important for me. So if you can just come back, yes, about the mission as a statement of our school. We are a school and not a preschool. This is my first message. And I just give you two extracts of the French curriculum that is very important for us. As you can read, inspire children to go to school where they can learn, affirm and develop their personality, and ensuring the success of all students in a school that is fair for all and challenging for everyone. These two extracts are very important for us. And as you can see, the maternelle, the kindergarten, can be defined according to four main principles, considering the development of each child, demonstrating confidence in every situation, the importance of the well-being and the caring, and of course, the positive educations that develop child's love of learning. If I can give you just a few more information, I will, in the next slide, develop the 5 learning areas we have in our program. So the pupils develop and mobilize the language in all its dimensions, but it's all about activities, physical and artistic activities, maths, and all about exploring the world. That means science, geography, and history. As you can see, it's a well balanced between academics and social emotional skills. And as you will discover just in a few minutes, all the Radio Amelia pedagogical approach stay in line with this program and this curriculum. So I will let now the 4 teachers explain a little more about Radio Amelia approach. Thank you and have a good evening.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here this evening. Before we proceed further, I would like to reiterate what our director, Jerome, had mentioned earlier on, that IFS Maternal is not a Regia Amelia inspired kindergarten, but rather the school and the director are very open-minded with the various approaches that different teachers are using that best suit their teaching and learning experiences. Okay, next slide. In short, Regia Amelia approach is not the only one, but it is one of the many good practices that we employ here in Maternal. And Doli, Cynthia, and SJ and I are the 4 teachers in the Maternal using this approach. Also, it is crucial to understand that Regia Amelia approach is not a single universal method that one could copy and apply in the classroom. It is a flexible, open-ended approach that depends on the context, the interaction of children and the educators interpretations of the experiences in the specific classrooms. So now the question is, how do we apply the Regia Amelia in our daily teaching and learning experiences whilst making sure that we are delivering the French curriculum? In order to give you a better idea about Regia Amelia approach, we think that it is essential for me to present you the basic concepts of Regia Amelia approach, and then my colleagues SJ, Cynthia, and Doli will present you the examples that take place in their classrooms. Next slide, please. So what is Regia Amelia approach? Regia Amelia approach history goes back to after World War II. It has a long and powerful history behind this approach. However, I will not be discussing this at length in this webinar due to the time constraint. I will share the main historical information today, which is the Regia Amelia approach is originally from a beautiful small city in northern Italy, Regia Amelia itself. It has a rich history of how this approach was founded after World War II, and the instrumental influencer and developer of this approach is Loris Malaguzzi. So what exactly is Regia Amelia approach? Regia Amelia approach is not a method, but it is an innovative educational philosophy and pedagogy. So instead of the mundane top-down approach, sit and listen and copy and do worksheets, Regia Amelia approach allows us to help the children achieve the same sets of required skills differently. Regia Amelia approach is a concept of contextual approach, and that's why it is applicable not only in Regia Amelia itself or only in the Regia Amelia inspired schools, but it is applicable in every school context. It is about the mindset of how the educators view the children and be flexible and fluid in the organization of lesson plans and environment. It is a child-centered and emergent pedagogy. Voices of the children are listened to and respected. Interests of the children should be the primary focus and included in the planning of our lessons. Respect is an important aspect. We celebrate the little achievements and contributions that the children make daily. No writing is too ugly or wrong. No drawing or painting that is meaningless or messy. It is perfectly okay to cry, feel how they feel, and no questions or opinions that are too silly. It is a co-constructivist approach. Everyone is a learner, including the teachers. Teachers do not know everything. It is important to acknowledge this and say, okay, as a teacher, I don't know. It is an excellent question. Let's find the answers together. It challenges the educators to listen to the democratic voices of the children, meaning instead of having the same set of teaching materials or lesson plans that we repeatedly use year after year and imparting the knowledge, we must be flexible and responsive to the children's reactions and interests. It is experiential. What does it mean? Teaching and learning are based on experience and observation and followed by the combined reflections of the teachers and the children. This means creating a context in which the teaching-learning relationship is highly evolved. This also means creating a context in which children from a very young age discover that there are problems which are not easily resolved, which perhaps cannot have an answer. It is relationship-driven. In an ideal situation, the children's learning experiences should not be confined to only the classroom walls. Relationships are not limited to only the relationship with classmates and teachers. We value the importance of parents, family members, other community members' contributions to the children's learning. We try our level best to include those external members whenever we could. Next slide, please. Now, let me present you the 4 key elements of Regia Amelia approach that we will be presenting to you here. The image of the child. The core foundation of this philosophy is based on its unique view about young children, namely the image of the child. Instead of viewing the children as weak and passive learners, we believe that the children have high potential, are powerful and competent, and have rights. They should be given the opportunities to develop their own unique potentials. We respect the children's voices and opinions, and we give them the time and space they need. We acknowledge that it is perfectly all right to make mistakes. We adults make mistakes too. But what is the crucial lesson? We all know that the answer is about what do we learn from the mistakes, and have we done our best? We focus on the positive and celebrate what they achieve rather than focusing on what they cannot reach. The beautiful outcome of this is that a trusting relationship is formed. Children enter the school with a set of knowledge and skills they bring from home. No matter how young they are, their life experiences before school, their social and cultural context, they are active digital consumers. They have a wealth of knowledge that we may not even process. So why not discuss the concrete reality of their lives that they are much familiar with and help them establish an intimate connection between their learning at school with this knowledge. The next slide, please. Another key element of a key principle of Regia Amelia approach is the environment. We call the environment of our classroom as the third teacher. The first teacher is the parents, the second teacher is the educators, and the third is the environment. Next slide. The environment includes the thoughtful setup of the classroom furniture and the accessibility of the materials. Next slide. Everything in the classroom is set up with the intention to encourage exploration and inquiry as an individual or as a group of learners. Next slide. The 100 languages. What is the 100 languages? It is one of the principles that we refer to a lot. We say that the children have 100. But let me be clear here that the languages are not just the different kind of languages that the children can speak. Next slide. But rather, it is a concept or a terminology to say that the children are encouraged to explore the environment and express themselves and share their thinking through multiple paths or channels. Through the experiment and develop competencies in using spoken languages, gestures, drawing, painting, building, sculpture, shadow play, collage, dramatic play, music, and emotion writing. And the list is more than 100. It is limitless. Next slide. Contrary to the orientations to imparting the children the skills in a directive manner, the children are encouraged to express themselves and reflect on their learning and thinking patterns. The materials and the setup in every classroom are chosen carefully. We keep them as open-ended as possible, as we know that when we let the children make decisions, the outcome is almost always mesmerizing. Next slide. The last key element is documentation. Teachers and are learners alongside the children, like I mentioned earlier. Teachers use documentation as a vital part of the teaching and learning process. Documentation is a process involving observation, documentation, and assessment. The functions of documentation are to make learning visible to the families, children, and the other educators. And lastly, and most importantly, it is a tool for continuous assessment for the teacher. And let me be clear here, assessment is not evaluation, meaning it's not sitting down to test them, but we look and observe how they communicate with each other. And in the process of documentation, we become aware of that learning and its value. And instead of doing structured tests and evaluation to assess the children, we document them continuously to help us identify their emergent interests. And from there, we react, adapt, and change our lesson planning accordingly. Thank you for listening to my part of the presentation. And now I will let my colleagues take over from here and show you the examples of the practices inside the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Hello, everyone. And now we're going to have a look at how the Reggio Emilia approach shapes the way we learn and go about with our day-to-day interactions with children in the petite section of the kindergarten. But first of all, let's have a closer look at our environment. In its role as a third teacher, this is a place that has been thoughtfully designed with young learners in mind. These open, welcoming, supportive, and engaging spaces provide a seamless flow between collaboration and play, allowing children to not only explore, investigate, experiment, but also ask questions about the world around them. As you will be able to see, they are what we call provocations for learning, or in other words, an invitation for endless possibilities. An emphasis is placed on having a balance of natural materials, such as plants and seeds, as well as recycled items, sensory tables, a wide range of construction materials where children create all sorts of things, ranging from skyscrapers to a garage. Loose parts, which are items like seashells, pine cones, and pebbles that can be repositioned, combined, redesigned, moved, taken apart, and put together in countless ways, to be used alone or combined with other types of materials, as there is no set of specific directions for them. A comfy spot for reading, as well as a light table. But more importantly, an overall conducive environment for children to feel comfortable and secure. In the next slide, you will be able to see some examples of activities already carried out. They range from the exploration of our facial features and reflection with items like wooden sticks and tree cookies, together with mirrors, water play, messy play with homemade glue, sensory play with rice that have been colored by the children, as well as the discovery of mixing through a variety of sensorial experiences. While children have the opportunity of encountering different types of play, this does not mean that they are left to chaos. It simply means that they are discovering the world and the various concepts as a result of the provocations introduced. For young children of this age group, it is important to learn through open-ended inquiry and hands-on experiences. The essential need to develop their understanding through ways that provide a platform to not just explore, imagine, but to also create and express themselves in one way or another. As such, the provision of these possibilities for play empowers children to guide their own learning at a pace that aligns with their individual development. Moving on, we will now have a look at how children's interests, motivations, curiosity, questions, expressed through their looks, gestures, words, and language guide our actions in the organization of our environment by planning for the exploration of materials and activities. In the next slide, you will be able to see that the placement of reflective surfaces, such as mirrors and transparent boxes, promote, amongst other things, play with images, observation of spaces from different perspectives, and engagement in playful experiences with other children and educators. When used in conjunction with a light table and translucent shapes, it further exposes them to light and reflection through observing, experimenting, and engaging in imaginative and creative play. As our learning journey takes us from one activity to another, its raining beans showcases an understanding, if we could have the next slide, please, that every child is considered a powerful, competent, creative, and curious individual. As the next slide shows, how as researchers, their ability to question and experiment through projects such as the discovery of movement and sound using beans and tubes, allowing them to co-construct knowledge through discussions with those around them. A project born from the children's interests that came from a combination of their prior experiences, their exploration, and the questions they might have about the world that surrounds them. It is through these projects that children acquire cognitive, physical, social, and language skills. In addition, they will also be able to apply these skills into different contexts and situations, gaining independence and confidence, taking their own decisions and responding to their own problems in their learning journey. What's happening next is the continued process of reflecting, questioning, and hypothesizing. As such, Marvelous Moving Marbles is an example of how the introduction of additional materials such as plain, paint, and plastic bottles, if we could have the next slide, please, the restructuring and transforming of spaces provides experiences that aim to build an environment that follows children's ideas and knowledge, expressed at play, all the while challenging their capacities and thus creating real zones of proximal development, by which we mean the distance between what children are capable of doing independently and that of what they can achieve with some guidance. Last but not least, while the arts are integrated as tools for cognitive, linguistic, and social development, can we have the next slide? It is also used as a vehicle to better understand the thinking process of young learners. Simply put, a way of observing what children know, are curious about, and what challenges them. In the Reggio approach, the term language extends beyond the verbal. It is considered as the diverse ways in which language is used to express oneself. This includes visual language, mathematical language, scientific language, to name but 3 of what is termed the 100 languages of children. So finally, we present to you the music maker, the sounds of rain, and all that shaking. Thank you for listening.
Hi, everybody. Looks like it's my turn now. I just want to say a very good evening to everybody, and thanks for coming. Before we go on to my first slide, I would just like to have a little candid moment here and say how honored I am to be here, because this approach for me is really a passion, and it led me to a full year of action research on this very subject for my master's dissertation, and I was lucky enough to have my research support the opening of a Reggio-inspired kindergarten when I was working in Hong Kong. So I'm really happy to be here. So I'm so happy that we can all, with my fellow colleagues, talk about this together, one of our great joys, and I'm really happy that people want to know more about it. And next slide, please. Thank you. So in this approach, as educators, we all know that our classrooms are almost an extension of us in a way. They are spaces that are intentionally set up to provoke reactions, feelings, questions, inquiry, anything really. And as Tammy pointed out in the beginning, the environment is the third teacher. As an educator, we really take advantage of this because the provocations we set up in a classroom are not really meant to be engaged with after the kids finish something first. This is what they should be engaging in the first place. They are the work, if we can put it that way. And the provocations sow the seeds of possibilities and what could be, and they allow children to manipulate, investigate, mull over, frown at, laugh at, or question what they're interacting with. So it is in these instances that we as educators observe and document 2 things that Tammy also mentioned during her little segment. We attune ourselves to the children's threads of thinking, where their interests lie, perhaps, and of course, the most importantly, how to take this information, extend it further, and to deepen their inquiry. And that's what it's all about. And with these lines of inquiry, it's a matter of starting conversations and working with my French counterpart at the IFS and streamlining this information and knowledge to align with the learning within the French curriculum. And that's how we work together on that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the slide you have in front of you with all these amazing pictures. Please go back 1 slide. Thank you. So the example of the provocations you see here within the environment is an exploration of the different parts of a plant. This is something we did this year with some of my MS children. So the children were free to explore different areas of the classroom that exposed different parts of a plant. One of the children's favorites, you can see there on the slide on the bottom left, is a root reveal, is what I like to call it, where roots of a plant could only be visible after water has been poured in. But of course, I don't tell them that. They have to figure that out themselves. And over the 2 weeks after that, the children were contributing to the evolution of this provocation here by observing and documenting the growth of water lotus seeds. If you can see there on the bottom right-hand corner, that's their documentation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we have here open-ended resources. They're widely used in a Reggio-inspired classroom, and they can be used to pose questions, leading to investigation and discovery. Young children, we all know, may not have the means or vocabulary to share their thoughts with us, but it doesn't mean they don't have them. When we heard Tammy mention the phrase 100 languages earlier, she, of course, told us that she doesn't mean it literally, and I must reiterate that because it is so important for everyone to understand this. It is supposed to be a, how do we put it, a reminder to look out for never-ending ways that children are communicating with us on a daily level, minute level, Every single second, they're communicating with us, with their bodies, with their faces, with their voices. It could be through a song, through a drawing, or through their actions. And giving children this opportunity to interact with open-ended materials like this, such as found objects, things they find on the street on a day out, loose parts, recycled materials, this can encourage imaginative play and draw out resourcefulness for future. But also what is really important in using these resources is to take away any restrictions that we want to put on them and allow for experimentation and exploration of materials and ideas. Next slide, please. Oh, it's my favorite part. I hope it's your favorite part too, after you listen. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a line of inquiry that became a wholly unexpected result after the children had a chance to interact with it without my intervention, as it were. This is an activity or an experience, like we call it, with the children, where we were initially exploring the concept of weight and density. So a very specific topic. We started with different vessels, different types of liquids for the children to manipulate and experiment with. And that was what they did for, I think, 1 or 2 days. And one day the children came into the classroom and saw this setup in front of them. You can see Samuel over here. There's water in a flat tray with a mixture of oil and ink. So that's all they got given. And I wasn't giving any instructions. I said, here you go. Let's see what's happening. And the children were given the opportunity to interact with it, manipulate it, investigate, do what they will with it. And after some time, one of the children started jumping up and down and said, look, I think we made outer space. Would you like to see outer space? Next slide, please. This is outer space. So one of the other children, Alice, a little girl, wanted to take a photo of what they created. And she actually, if you can see the dark blue one on the left-hand side, this is the photo she took, which is great. And then another little boy said that, wait, we can't stop here. We need to print it. We have to print this. And at this point, as the educator, I relayed, oh, of course, it can be done. I can have it printed off for you for tomorrow. Yeah, I can have that done. Let me know. But he let me know that I had misunderstood him on multiple levels. And he
As you can see, we have lost Cynthia, so maybe from technical issues. Maybe we can ask Doli if you are ready to start your presentation, and as soon as Cynthia is coming back, we'll let her the floor again. Okay.
I'm happy to start. Good evening again, everyone. I'd like to share my Reggie-inspired practice at the IFS. Oops. Okay, thank you. And I work with the children who are 5 turning 6 years old. First, allow me to share with you 2 stories from last year. They happened within the same hour, one morning. The first one happened at the kitchen area, which sometimes transforms into a restaurant. Faustin ordered several items. She ordered food and drinks. Alicia noted them down with great precision. Faustin wanted to know how much she will pay as she was eating, and Alicia used her fingers to count. But oops, she is quickly running out of fingers. Lucien, who was cutting paper nearby was attracted to the transaction. So together, they were able to charge Faustin the correct amount. Needless to say, the restaurant did not lose any money to the customers that day. The second story is at the reading area. There's an abundance of books in that area. We have whiteboards, pens, markers, and different kinds of paper. Two girls, Chloe and Olivia, took some Scrabble tiles. Then they combined the Scrabble tiles together and made nonsense words. It was a kind of a phonics game. It was at once challenging and oddly funny. The collaborators found it meaningful and gratifying, and all that giggling attracted Alice, who was passing by. So she too decided she wanted to play the game. So before you know it, it had become more challenging and fun. What these two stories highlight are a few things: the uniqueness of children and their thinking and approach to tasks, their inclination to communicate and collaborate. They are social beings. Their desire to participate in joyful exchange, and their innate capability of building knowledge. As a Regia inspired educator, my role was simply to set up the space, to provide the tools, and promote a comfortable atmosphere for joyful literacy pursuits to take place. Next slide, please. I'd like to share a third story which happened around the time of Deepavali. In the IFS context, there's a strong desire to understand the local culture. So every time there is a big celebration, we would bring the children to different places around Singapore. As you can guess, we brought them to Little India. Before we left, we had a chat with the children and asked them, "What do you know about Little India?" And they said things like, "Oh, I've been there many times. There are buildings, some very colorful buildings. There are temples, and people go there to pray." Others also said, "Oh, Little India again? It's like we're doing it. We've done it from PS. We did it in MS. We're doing it again this year." So these moments are the moments that make you think, how can I make this more interesting for the children? During the trip, I was with a particular group who were at a market stall. They were circling these particular items on the right, and they were mesmerized by them. There was like a silent wow on their faces. So I asked them, "Shall we bring one back to class?" There was a unanimous yes, so we had two sticker rangolis as treasures from the trip that day. On the bottom right, you'll see the children the next day, post excursion. It was during a morning meeting, and I asked them to go with the in thinking pairs. The question was, what was interesting for you? Why was it interesting? And I sat down to listen to the conversation. Again, Rangoli was prominent, so I noted it down in my observation notes alongside the word validate. Is this really what's captured their imagination? Is this really what's important to them? On to the next slide, I'll explain further about validation. So I look back at all the photos I've taken, some transcripts of conversations between children, between them and me during our morning meetings. I won't show you any notes because it looks like chicken scratch. And these are the things that I've found. From the top, you'll see Celine's colorful and intricate work using paper and marker. Right beside it is Theodore's patterned rainbow. In the middle, a photo of Margot and Tiffany patterning with rubber seeds and colored sticks. At the bottom, a snowflake-like construction using tongue depressors. And most importantly, bottom right, Joseph's pre-excursion drawing of a rangoli. As a Reggie-inspired educator, I go through the process of three things. Sorry, back to the old slide. Thank you. Process of observation, where I ask myself what is interesting and important. And during this investigation, we had a few possibilities: Diya, saris, bindis, and the gods at the temple. I go through a reflection process after the observation where I ask, so what? Why is it important? And what evidence do I have to validate this interest and why and its importance? At this point, this is where the notes and the photos are really important. And when I can't decide and I feel a little bit confused or I can't make a choice, I would go to Tammy or to Cynthia just to be able to gain clarity and consult with them. I might also look at the list of the French curriculum and see which interest has the greatest possibility to achieve the outcomes that are outlined there. So aligning with the outcomes. After reflection, I go through the third process, which is planning, where I ask myself, what's next? How do I challenge the children? What invitations and experiences can I design to engage them? This is, as you've heard the word, the provocations that we set up. On to the next slide, please. Here, I'm going to share the experiences that I've set up for the Rangoli investigation. On the upper left, I asked the children to stay with their groups, normally 5 or 6. The challenge was to draw a Rangoli, not just any Rangoli, but a group Rangoli. First, they had to choose a leader who was going to draw and moderate the exchange. Then they had to take turns sharing ideas. And lastly, they had to negotiate and agree on a representative design. And from there, they used flour and colored cornstarch called holly to recreate their Rangoli design. On the bottom right, you'll see the reverse of A. This is experience B. The challenge was for dyads, the two individuals, to create a rangoli using natural materials. You see here pebbles, twigs, and rubber seeds. Then they'd have to recreate the 3D rangoli on a flat surface using pen and paper. As a Reggie-inspired educator, my role was to invite multiple means of expression to support the children's 100 languages, to challenge them to move from a familiar code, which is drawing, to an unfamiliar one, which is holly and flower. I promote taking risks in reconstructing ideas. There's a theoretical basis for these actions. In fact, I'm going to offer you two. Howard Gardner's idea of the multiple intelligences and Lev Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, already mentioned by SJ. This is where children realize their highest potential for development by problem solving in collaboration with capable peers or adults. This brings me to my fifth slide. Next slide, please. The environment. In this project, these are some of the materials used, highlighting the environment as a third teacher. We had wooden grappa toys, wooden manipulatives originally intended for learning math concepts, flour and holly powder, and natural materials, gifts from nature and some manufactured ones. Why did I decide to use flour and holly powder? These two materials look the same, but they don't feel the same. They certainly do not act the same. And children were quick to catch that. They said in their reflection, "It does not always go where I want. It cracks." As for natural found objects, it's particularly rewarding to work with them, not just because, as a Reg-inspired educator, it's normal for us to help orient children with the community, connect them to it, and feel a sense of belonging. It is also, but also because natural materials welcome and support the uniqueness of each child. They are rich with possibilities for combination. Most importantly, natural materials are incredibly instructive. No two rubber seeds have the same marbled marking, and they contain in them the history of Singapore's past as a hub for the rubber industry. No two pebbles might look the same, but they may not weigh the same. Wooden cookies or tree discs reveal through their rings and grains the milestones and growth and the traces of weather. Last slide, please. At the end of the Rangoli project, I gathered all of the photos and notes and turned it into a 4-page document that made visible the children's development. It was shared with my partner, the children and parents in the class. And just to give you an idea, I'll invite you to look at these sets of photos and trace with me the children's growth. The first set on the upper right, we can appreciate how children's ability to draw evolved in complexity if we compare the first with the last three. Then the second set at the bottom, the same evolution can be perceived from the first circular construction to the spiral-like creations using found objects. Look closer to appreciate the meticulous detailing that makes visible the children's ability to count and pattern, their understanding of balance and symmetry, all skills indicated in the French curriculum at the maternelle. A closer look awakens a great appreciation for children's efforts. In Reg-inspired practice, documentation is not so much making end products shine, but retelling the process of learning, highlighting how children moved from old to new knowledge, and it is about capturing the challenges and how they were overcome. Documentation is an accumulation of the traces of a particular group of children, their richness and uniqueness. It's a frame for the beauty of their learning community. That's all from me, and have a good night.
Thank you, Doli. So Cynthia is coming back, so we will let her finish her presentation, and after that we'll answer the question in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you, guys, and sorry about that. It's not a webinar without technical issues. So kind of glad it happened in a way. So we are, yes, here, we've looked at this slide already. So can we go on to the next one? Yeah, so I ended with when the children were being offered my assistance in how they can print the water. So they've asked for different types of paper to see which one would do the job. And rules were relayed. One was, we have to count to 20 or else it won't work. Or another person said, it's got to be more than 20. So there was a lot of counting back and forth with different materials. And on the third attempt, we can see the result on the next slide. And this is what they got in the end. This was the very first specimen of a printing of outer space. The children were ecstatic. They were jumping up and down. It was an amazing experience. And they told everyone who would listen, their French teacher, their assistant teacher, classmates who weren't involved, people in the corridor. It's endless. But that was the energy that we wanted to live off on. And this is the beauty of the Reggio Emilia approach. I, as a teacher, I'm going to be very candid again. I'll admit firsthand that as teachers, most of us were trained to plan ahead, know the outcomes. But this approach requires me, and I'm sure my fellow educators here would say the same, that we have to let certain things evolve. We have to let narratives unfold. We have to remind ourselves again and again, and this is every single day, that children have the ability to build their own knowledge. And it is something we really have to remind ourselves as not even Reggio inspired teachers, as normal teachers. And it requires me as the educator to almost relinquish control a little bit, which is, I have to admit, it's scary. It's scary in an educational context. It's scary in life context. And it's a skill that took me years to refine, and I'm still trying to do that. We all improve as educators, so I'm still on that journey. Next slide, please. Next and last slide for me. So this is another part of the Reggio Emilia approach that is a big passion of mine, documentation. We've heard all three of our previous educators before me talk about this. And the reason why it's extremely important is because it keeps both the children and educators engaged within their learning. If done well, it can be a conduit for reflection. What went well? What didn't go so well? What happened there? How could it have been different? Many, many questions to be asked. I cannot speak for my fellow colleagues here, but I get a question a lot when I get asked about this approach. And that is, how do you document the nuances of what the children say and do every day? The short answer is that it looks something not unlike a headless chicken with a notebook, pen, and camera. It can look like that through the untrained eye, but the long answer is right here on the screen for you. So at the top, you can see those are my notes there. I wouldn't bother trying to read them because they are illegible, probably only I could read them. And it's only a very small glimpse of it here, of what I write down every single day in every single classroom I'm in. Here I record interactions, dialogue, sometimes questions that I want to ask myself later. It's raw data, if you will. This is how we compile it. And the most important thing for me is to, when I enter a classroom, leave judgment and reflection at the door. I'm not there to reflect on what's being said or make a judgment on, was he right or wrong? Is that a misconstrued idea? Is there a misconception? No, that's not the time for it right now. The time for it comes later, but right now it is time to watch and listen and observe. And it's very important to have those things put at the door. So after that, you can see the next picture right down. It says the grapevine. That is my version of what we call a reflective journal, which is essentially a journal, a documentation of the children's inquiry of the week. It includes images, quotes of what children have said, questions, and most importantly, the noted areas of extension and learning. This process of writing this every single Friday before it goes out, it's very therapeutic for me, and it's absolutely necessary for me because it unloads everything in here onto the screen, if you will, because it's on the computer. It's my reflection process. What interested the children this week? Were there significant interactions? Were there learning opportunities or not? Where's the problem there? Which children really engaged with certain things and which didn't, and why not? And for me, this process is so crucial. I cannot tell you how many times I've said to myself, like, oh man, I wish I said this at this crucial moment, or I worry that if I extend this line of inquiry next week, will the momentum be lost? How do I maintain their threads of thinking so that we can go back into the subject? And here comes what's next. So this document has other uses too, besides for me to unload. First use. Second use is that at the beginning of every week, Monday, the children will come face to face with this document inside my classroom. They come in and I have it printed out for them and it's offered to them as a provocation, if you will. Back to that word again, provocation. This collection gets bigger and bigger as the academic year progresses. Almost at this point in time, because we're at the end of a very busy academic year this year, it almost resembles a book. And so through the images mostly, they present the children with opportunities to reawaken any dormant curiosities or enhance any ideas that they may have. And then where does this lead? Back to my first slide where they have provocations. Only now, there are different provocations. They've been intentionally set up as an extension to the knowledge that the children co-constructed themselves. And that's how the cycle works, back and forth, exchange between the children and me and the provocations. And there's all three of those in a wheel. And I did say that this document has multiple uses. So here is number 3. Every week, this document gets sent out to our class parents, which helps them keep in touch with their children's learning. We mustn't forget, though, what Tammy said in the beginning, that the environment is the third teacher. We as educators, we are the second. And I hope there are a lot of parents here tonight, and you guys are the first. You really are the first. So many times I've had parents come back to me and say, oh, I looked through the grapevine with my kid this weekend and they saw themselves in the photo and they talked nonstop about what they did, what their friends said. Can't wait to do it again when they go back to school and learn new things. So this journal really does help parents feel welcome to the children's learning progress, and it enables them to share in their child's way of thinking, because I openly admit it, they do think differently from us, and it's worth exploring. That is me done. I was about to pass on to Doli, but I think she's done hers. So thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you.
Thank you for this wonderful and fully documented presentation. So thanks for Doli, Cynthia, SG, and Tammy for this presentation. We have few questions in the chat. So let's start with the first one. Give me 1 second. Yes. So how easy is it for a child schooled using this Reggio Emilia philosophy to transition to another school on an alternative pedagogical model? So it's the first question in the chat. Who would like to answer? So you can discover it in the chat. How easy is it for a child schooled using this Reggio Emilia philosophy to transition to another school, sorry, on an alternative pedagogical model? Who is ready to answer?
I'll take the question, Jerome.
Okay.
I've been fortunate to teach at a junior kindergarten and kindergarten levels in another setting, and I've been with the GS level for 3 years now. So I've used this approach, and the children who have been with me will initially have the same sets of anxieties that most children go through when they shift. So it's perfectly natural for children to feel like, oh, it's a different. They know, they have a sense that things are going to change and things are going to be different, and it's all part of the process. The thing about children who have gone through this process is they are very confident in asking questions, and they're very confident in looking for answers. So no matter which place you bring them to, they will know how to handle it. So I've seen it many times over in the 8 years that I've been teaching using this approach. I hope that answers the question.
I just want to add to Doli's comment, answer to the question. So it comes back to the question of the image of the child. We think that the children are powerful, they are capable, they're competent. So, for example, the children know how to behave at home and how to behave at school. And even during the year that they are with us, for example, we all have different French partners, and we are all using different approaches. When they switch from one classroom to another classroom, they are able to adapt very quickly. So I think we need to give them the credits and trust them in this.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Doli. Is Reggio Emilia approach kind of Montessori? Is it related or not related to Montessori?
They're completely different. They both come from the same country, region, but Montessori uses a modular approach, and most of their materials are self-correcting, unlike the materials that we use that are, which are mostly open-ended. So it's quite the opposite, materials-wise at least.
Okay, thank you. Another specific question about the observation. So, be it anecdotal or scientific, are there any specific observations that you notice from your children learning through Reggio Emilia? So it's a very precise question.
So I noticed that this particular question was asked before the examples were given by Cynthia and Doli. So I think through their presentation, I'm sure you have seen the concrete example of how we plan our lessons based on our observations. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Some question regarding Reggio Emilia in elementary classes. Is it possible or not?
I'm gonna try and have a little crack at this one because this is my full year in the maternelle at IFS. Last year I was split between the two. In fact, I was last year with half the time with PS and half the time with CM1 and CM2. It's a very big gap. I admit it. I'm not gonna lie. But whilst there are certain things that we need to hit in the older levels, I still try to bring aspects of it in there because I'm so used to teaching that way. For example, with my CM2s, we're outside all the time. Like if you see the kids running around outside on the ground floor, that's probably my CM2 children last year. Because we try to like engage them in ways that, you know, they're engaging their whole body, which means their minds are engaged as well. We're out there playing word games, we're out there hunting for things, and then afterwards they write about it. And it just gets so much richer than, you know, them just absorbing information from elsewhere, whereas they can go and find it for themselves outside. And these children were 10 years old. So it's a very big gap from my little cute little 3-year-olds in PS, but I do try my very best to get them to think for themselves. They always like to self-assess themselves, what they did well, what they didn't do so well. And I think that reflection process is a very big part of the Reggio Emilia approach. Children understand that how they see themselves is very important. I always tell the children, yeah, however big or small they are, it's really important that you see yourself as competent. And I think most of my kids did, because they felt like they came in, they were more confident whenever they were in my classroom, and and as a result, they wanted to come to class, they wanted to learn, and they liked the ways they were learning. I remember this one child, and she's now in CZM because she was in CM2, even older, secondary, I can't really say, but she wrote me an email saying that she missed my way of teaching, which I found really brought a tear to my eye. It was a very big compliment, and I told her that I felt the same. I felt like she understood me more than she would otherwise if I hadn't taught her that way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's my experience of trying to bring this into the older setting. I don't know if it answers it for my best.
I think you wanted to, the question was if we would recommend it for the higher grades.
I would.
I would, yeah.
I would, through and through.
because it's embracing possibilities, right? So if you went into the classroom to look at the possibilities by which you can extend concepts that you're going to teach, then you're not looking at the limits. You're looking at ways of doing this with the environment supporting you while observing them and getting from them how you might push the curriculum in other directions that can only serve to deepen and support their learning. So I would totally recommend it.
Yeah, got my vote too.
And also, just to add on to that, it's important to understand that, to reiterate that again, we are still achieving the objectives of the French curriculum. It's just a matter of how we move from A to B. So we are not deviating from the outcome. It's just a matter of how do we achieve it. Yeah.
Okay. Few more questions. How do you manage and balance a group of kids with mixed personalities? Some might be more verbal than others or less verbal. Do kids always take turn? How do you manage all the personalities in your class?
Tammy, say something.
Okay.
I saw you going.
Okay.
I'll let you go first.
Okay, first of all, I think it's important to celebrate and acknowledge the differences of the personalities. For example, we cannot have, we have big group discussion, right? We cannot expect every single child to contribute the same to the group discussion, because some could be quieter, some could be taking over the whole discussion the entire time, you know. But that's why we talk about the 100 languages, to give the different children with different character to express themselves. And some prefer to draw. For example, one child who was very, very reserved at the beginning of the year, she wouldn't speak a word in the group discussion. But it was through the painting and all that, she was expressing herself so much, and she started to talk to me so much. And it was always a one-on-one occasion. But then again, it doesn't matter, because she expresses her opinions and the view of the world, which is the most important thing. And this is how we view it. We cannot apply the same, saying that you have to do this in order to be the excellent students and so on. We tap into the characteristic and give them the path and channels to express themselves. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you. To answer one question about which subjects are concerned and which streams are you teaching in? So I can give some information. So Doli and Tammy are teaching in the English Plus stream. SG and Cynthia are in the classic stream. So it's possible to do it in each stream. And for all the subjects, as I mentioned at the start, we have 5 learning in our French curriculum, learning areas. Language, physical and artistical activities, maths, and exploring the world. So these 5 learning areas are concerned by the Reggio Emilia approach. Maybe, yes, Doli, can you please repeat what are the most difference between Montessori and Reggio Emilia approach?
I wouldn't know about the biggest difference or the most, but I know at least on the materials level that the materials used in Montessori, well, they're very expensive to begin with. And there's Montessori teacher training. The materials in Montessori are self-correcting, which means that you will know you've got it wrong because you'll have one part not fitting a hole, or you have an extra that doesn't seem to belong anywhere. I don't know if my colleagues have taught in a Montessori setting, because I've only studied it. I've never taught in one. Whereas with a Reggio-inspired setting, you will have all sorts of natural materials, found objects and manufactured ones that are quite open-ended. There's no right and wrong way to use them.
Okay, thank you, Doli. I think we have no more questions. So if somebody would like to add something, if not, I will only, what is the viewer approach?
Thank you, Jerome. I will, if you don't have any more questions, I will just thank all of you guys to have been, first to have accepted our invitation. It was a very interesting talk. And I would like to invite everybody to stay connected with us, either through our website or our social media. So this webinar will be, as others, be downloaded on our YouTube channel. So you will have all the details on our website afterwards. Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful evening, and we hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks and good night.